With The Lord of the Rings of Power fast approaching, Tolkien fans may be wondering what else the future has in store for the author's legendary universe. A young Aragorn series? A spin-off in the Shire? Keep watching for all this and more. Back in 2018, when The Rings of Power was still in the early days of pre-production, Tolkien fan site theonering.net reported that the series would open its first season centered on a young Aragorn. In a subsequent tweet thread, the site suggested that Aragorn's story could easily feature such characters as Arwen, Gandalf, Elrond, and even Gollum. Obviously, it has since become clear that theonering.net were way off the mark, but they were right about one thing. The adventures of young Aragorn would make for a fantastic television series. Much of the future king of Gondor's early life is told in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings. In these stories, Aragorn journeys into the wilderness as chieftain of the Dunedain, befriends Gandalf the Grey, and serves the king of Rohan and the steward of Gondor in their struggles against Mordor. He also travels into the mysterious regions in the east and south of Middle-earth and attempts to track down Gollum after his disappearance from the Misty Mountains. Perhaps most importantly of all, though, he meets and falls in love with Arwen Undomiel, the daughter of the elf lord Elrond. As far as plot material goes, it doesn't get much more bountiful than this. Aragorn's quests through Middle-earth prior to The Lord of the Rings would prove the basis for multiple seasons worth of television or streaming series. It doesn't exactly hurt either that Amazon Studios happens to reportedly own the rights to the appendices in which they're contained. In the extended edition of Peter Jackson's Return of the King, Gimli laments to Legolas that he can't call on his fellow dwarves to join the Rohirrim on their march to Gondor. Legolas replies,
"Your kinsmen may have no need to write a will. I fear war already marches on their own lands."
This is a reference to an incident that only appears in the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, the Battle of Dale. This monumentally important conflict takes place concurrently with the Siege of Minas Tirith and the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. The 2-week-long confrontation finds an army of men and dwarves, led by King Brand of Dale and Dane Ironfoot, fighting against Sauron's Easterlings. In the course of the battle, both Brand and Dane are killed, but their successors manage to prevent the Easterlings from breaking through towards Gondor. After the ring is destroyed, they finally drive the enemy from their lands. Both Dale and Erebor have already been depicted in live action in all 3 Hobbit movies, but the Battle of Dale has yet to warrant anything more than a brief mention in a single deleted scene. Still, this savage confrontation is rife with drama, from Brand and Dane's last stand at the gate of Erebor to the darkest hours of the Easterling siege to the final push to free the mountain and its people. New Line Cinema is currently gearing up to release an anime feature film about the life of Helm Hammerhand, the legendary king of Rohan. And if the studio is indeed eyeing an anime-based future for their Middle-earth stories, they could do much worse than an adaptation of the Battle of Dale. Ask any Tolkien fan for the one chapter in Middle-earth's history they'd like to see adapted into live action, and there's a pretty solid chance they'll say, the Angmar War. Again, this story appears almost solely within the appendices to The Lord of the Rings. This war is fought between the forces of Angmar, led by the Witch King, and the Mannish Kingdom of Arnor, and it takes place over the course of some 600 years during the Mid-Third Age. The conflict engulfs the region of Eriador in northwestern Middle-earth, bringing together men and elves from every corner of the world to stand against Sauron's chief servant. But before the end of the war, Arnor itself has been almost entirely annihilated, though the Free Peoples do eventually defeat the Witch King and force him to flee to parts unknown. In fact, it's after the final great confrontation of the war, the Battle of the Fornost, that the Elf Lord Glorfindel infamously prophesizes that no man will kill the Witch King. And you probably know how that turns out.
I am no man.
The Angmar War is one of the darkest and most brutal conflicts in the history of the Third Age. While this narrative is marked by death, disease, and destruction, it also exhibits the same sense of hope and unity that The Lord of the Rings does so well. Obviously, no single movie could possibly capture the sheer scale of the Witch King's finest hour, but a long-form series would be another matter entirely. Otherwise known as the Istari, the 5 angelic Maiar who come to Middle-earth as wizards play extraordinarily important roles in the fight against Sauron. These 5 wizards are Saruman the White, Gandalf the Grey, Radagast the Brown, and the 2 blue wizards, LOTR and Palando. You probably know how things play out with Saruman and Gandalf. The former allows his ambition to get the better of him, falling into darkness before his own lackey unceremoniously assassinates him. The latter, well, he's Gandalf, isn't he?
You shall not pass!
Radagast, meanwhile, settles down near Mirkwood for much of the Third Age, befriending the birds and beasts of the forest and keeping an eye on the growing shadow in Dol Guldur. In the books, he inadvertently leads Gandalf into Saruman's trap before helping him escape, and then pretty much vanishes from Middle-earth altogether. The Blue Wizards venture eastwards to either disrupt Sauron's plans or establish their own magical cults, depending on which of Tolkien's writings you take as gospel. Saruman, Gandalf, and Radagast arrive in Middle-earth around the year 1000 of the Third Age, while the Blue Wizards possibly show up sometime in the Second Age. This means that the Istari have been roaming for at least 2,000 years before Frodo embarks on his quest. Thanks to Tolkien's reticence on their history, readers have only their imaginations to suggest what they might have been doing during that time. Perhaps a spin-off of some kind, following the wizards on their adventures in the mortal world, could shed some light on the matter? The story of the kingdom of Khazad-dûm is long, glorious, and dark. Literally. Best known as the setting for some of the most iconic moments in the Fellowship of the Ring, Moria once housed a thriving dwarvish realm that stretched far beneath the deep reaches of the Misty Mountains. During the First and Second Ages of Middle-earth, the history of Khazad-dûm is one of peace, prosperity, and expansion. Even during the turbulent days of the late Second Age, these dwarves avert the ravages of war by shutting their gates and cutting themselves off from the outside world. Everything changes, however, during the Third Age. In the year TA 1980, the dwarves, obsessively mining the stores of mithril contained within the mountain, accidentally awaken a Balrog.
Shadow and flame.
King Durin VI is killed during the demon's rampage, earning it the name Durin's Bane, and the surviving dwarves flee their once great kingdom. The dwarves attempt to retake Moria a couple of times over the next few hundred years, but it isn't until the coming of Durin VII, over 170 years after the events of The Lord of the Rings, that they finally succeed. The rise, fall, and rise again of the greatest dwarvish kingdom is a tragic and terrifying saga, but one that also goes overlooked by many of Tolkien's readers. No doubt it would provide ample opportunity for a filmmaker to explore a darker, more horrific side of the author's world and give the dwarves of Middle-earth some much-needed attention in the process. The fall of Moria briefly intertwines with another stage in the long journey of Tolkien's dwarves, one that would be equally gripping as its own adaptation. Fans have actually glimpsed a live-action portrayal of the wars of the Dwarves and Orcs before. The climactic battle of Azanulbizar appears in a flashback in The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, but there's a whole lot more to this desperate struggle between dwarf and orc. The war begins when Moria's orc chieftain Azog kills Thror, the exiled king under the mountain. Thror's son, Thrain, marches to war to avenge his fallen father, amassing a great army of dwarves from all across Middle-earth. The dwarves plunder and pillage down the breadth of the Misty Mountains. Tolkien writes, "Both sides were pitiless, and there was death and cruel deeds by dark and by light." After 6 years of warfare, much of which takes place underground, the two sides clash outside the east gate of Moria, in what is later known as the Battle of Azanulbizar. Here, Dane Ironfoot kills Azog, and the orcs are routed, though they stop short of entering Moria for fear of Durin's Bane. Worse still, the vengeance of the dwarves comes at a terrible cost, and countless dwarvish lives are lost during this final battle. While the War of the Dwarves and Orcs might only constitute one part of a wider Moria project, it could easily stand as its own story, and particularly one for fans of the Hobbit movies. A spin-off film or series set within the boundaries of the Shire could take almost any form. It might offer a pleasant and comedic exploration of the lives of hobbits during peacetime. The stakes needn't be higher than a drunken expedition to Farmer Maggot's crop, or a dispute over an elderly relative's inheritance. It could go a little darker, too, perhaps bringing the scouring of the Shire to the big screen for the first time. To really show the hobbits in a brand new light, however, you'd have to turn to the war between the hobbits and orcs that ends with the Battle of Greenfields. A few hundred years before The Lord of the Rings, bands of orcs from the Misty Mountains invade Eriador. While the Dunedain Rangers manage to keep most of them at bay, one group, led by the Goblin King Golfambul, successfully enters the Shire. Led by Bandobras Took, the hobbits meet the orcs in a battle at the Greenfields. When Took decapitates Golfambul and sends his head flying into a nearby rabbit hole, the battle is won.
And the game of golf invented at the same time.
In so many of Tolkien's stories, war is shown to be very much the province of men, elves, dwarves, and orcs. A short series, animation, or even a film that sees Bandobras and his hobbits rise up to defend their homeland would shine a whole new light on the Shire and its inhabitants. During his lifetime, J.R.R. Tolkien composed 3 stories set during the Quenta Silmarillion that were written to be enjoyed as complete works in and of themselves. Found in the Silmarillion, these stories did not require the reader to have an understanding of the wider mythos. They are known as the 3 great tales of the elder days of Middle-earth, and by far the most famous of them all is the tale of Beren and Lúthien. Otherwise known as the Quest for the Silmaril, the narrative revolves around the forbidden romance between Beren, a man, and Lúthien, the daughter of the Elf King, Thingol. When their love is exposed, an enraged Thingol jokingly promises that Beren will be allowed to marry Lúthien if he enters Morgoth's fortress of Angband, plucks a sacred jewel from his crown, and brings it back to the elves of Doriath. To his surprise, Beren agrees, quickly setting out to fulfill his task. The story was very dear to Tolkien's heart. On his gravestone, he is named as Beren, while his beloved wife, Edith, is named as Lúthien. Perhaps that's why the tale of Beren and Lúthien arguably feels like the author's finest work, swathed in the near-palpable passion and devotion he clearly felt towards his world.
What happened to her? She died.
Certainly, the Lay of Lúthien, an incomplete poetic rendition of the tale, contains some of his most beautiful and affecting writing. No part of Tolkien's vast legendarium is more deserving of a faithful adaptation. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite shows are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.